Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is the monthly wrap-up for January of 2022. Okay, so I actually had a pretty good reading month. I'm going to be talking about the books that I read very quickly in summary. I'm not going to go into detail on any of them, all except for one. One of the books I have made more thorough videos discussing these books in my series Fresh Read Kills, where I discuss books more thoroughly and my thoughts about them, the books that I had recently just finished. So with that in mind, okay, this is going to be a very quick summary. The first one that I finished in January was Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, An American Controversy by Annette Gordon-Reed. I knew that I was going to be beginning, and I'm currently reading it right now, in mid-January. The Hemings is of Monticello, also by Annette Gordon-Reed. And this was published in the 90s, before DNA evidence essentially confirmed the relationship, confirmed that Jefferson had children with Sally Hemings. This is more like a historiography. This is an examination of how historians and people who after the fact spoke of the supposed affair, again, supposed at the time that this was written, how they spoke of it, in particular historians, but and also how racism played a role in that. And she looks at the evidence. She has a legal background, and that Gordon-Reed does, and she kind of takes this very lawyerly approach, where let's look at the evidence, let's look at everything, that, the corroborative evidence, what evidence goes against it, what does reason tell us, and I think that she undeniably, to the reader, it's undeniable to the reader in the end. By the end of this, that Jefferson and Sally Hemings, it makes total sense that yes, they would have had an affair going on here. Again, this is before the DNA evidence, but I thought this was very good. Again, if you want my complete thoughts, you can go back and look at the video that I made about it. But I would definitely recommend this. This next book I did not make a video about, and I took off the dust jacket as well, because I try to keep this channel PG-13, and this book is definitely, the cover is definitely not that. It's essentially vampire erotica, and I just kind of read it out of curiosity, a little bit of adult fun, and it does have, it looks nice inside and everything. There was one actually really good story in here, and the rest were kind of but so many typos. The copy editing on this was terrible, I have to say, and that was often very distracting. It's really dependent on how good the writers themselves were at editing, because I don't think that anybody really went through this very well. But anyway, I still had fun with it, but because of all those typos, even if I said what this one was, which I'm not going to get into, I wouldn't really recommend it. The next book that I read was A Gazelle Ate My Homework, and I read this for the Reading Africa 2022 challenge. That was something that was organized by Mark over at Book with Elvis. I am recording this actually on the Sunday that is the last game in that tournament, the soccer tournament for the African nations. And those who participated in this event, Mark randomly chose a country for us to follow that was inside the tournament. And we would basically read a book about or from that country that was pulled, and follow them through the tournament. And if they were defeated by another country, we would read something about or from that country and just continue to follow them through. So the country I got was the Ivory Coast. So this is my pick for that. So again, it's called A Gazelle Ate My Homework, a journey from Ivory Coast to America, from American to Black, and from undocumented to doctor, with side trips into several religions and assorted misadventures by Habib Fanny. And this was fun. This was a really fun memoir, autobiography, and he's a medical doctor, and he's also somebody who's very popular on the website Quora. And I think that's really the impetus for creating this. I think he had a lot of support from that website, and a lot of encouragement. And of course, he talks about growing up in the Ivory Coast, but then immigrating to the United States, and kind of what that shock was like. Learning English, he spoke French. Learning what it meant to be black in the United States from somebody who did not share the African American cultural heritage. Being incredibly poor, but through a lot of hard work, but also a lot of generosity from others, eventually getting into medical school. And he also talks about religion as well. He grew up Muslim. Once he was in the U.S., he took he very quickly, for a short time, became Christian. And then eventually he gradually loses his faith altogether and realizes that he's an atheist. And all of that is in here. It's often humorous at times, it's funny, but it's also very insightful. And I really enjoyed this. I would highly recommend this one. Also for the tournament, the soccer tournament, I read a book attached to Sierra Leone, which was in the same group as Ivory Coast. And I picked this up originally, of course, in case the Ivory Coast lost to Sierra Leone. They did end up losing to them, but this was so interesting, I wanted to read it anyway. So this is The Voyage of the Slave Ship Hare, A Journey into Captivity from Sierra Leone to South Carolina by Sean M. Kelley. And this is from the University of North Carolina Press, and it came out just a few years ago. And it looks at the voyage of the slave ship in the 1750s that went from Rhode Island to what is today's Sierra Leone, although that's kind of anachronistic, and then goes over to South Carolina, in particular Charleston, or Charlestown at the time. And he's basically taken the raw data that we know about about this voyage, this slave ship. We have like basic, it's like looking at the receipts from a shopping trip, and then trying to do research and figure out like what was the store like, who was working there. That's kind of like what this is. There's a lot of speculation in here, but of course it's well-researched speculation. The result is, it's not always necessarily a page turner. There's a lot of data being thrown at you. It's a lot of numbers, a lot of facts, but it's not necessarily written in a compelling narrative way, but it is really fascinating, and I'm glad that I read it. And I was especially really interested to read about the slave culture of the mid-18th century in South Carolina. I thought that stuff towards the end of the book was actually really interesting. So I'm glad I read it. I don't know if I'd recommend it to general readers, but if you're interested in this subject, it's highly recommended. Next, I read Gothic Histories, A Taste for Terror, 1764 to the Present by Clive Bloom. I am kind of one of my reading projects. I have a couple of reading projects with Mark over at Book Time with Elvis. His name's coming up a lot in this video, but we are reading together Gothic literature from the 18th and 19th centuries. So in December we read The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. At some point coming up within the next few months, we're going to read The Monk by Matthew Lewis. And I'm a huge horror fan, always have been. Especially horror cinema. I'm still very much a novice when it comes to horror literature. But I wanted to get a sense of how the Gothic transitioned into what we call horror today. And so I read this as, it's a survey history, essentially, designed, I'm assuming, for undergrads, little less than 200 pages. And it goes through Gothic literature, drama, eventually cinema. And it does a pretty good job. I certainly learned a lot. I did talk about in the video that I made about this that I don't think the writing was always entirely clear. It wasn't always that easy to follow his thread about where he was going with things. A lot of typos as well. So certainly things that diminished my pleasure in reading this. But I certainly learned a lot, and I'm glad that I read it. Okay, I have two more. The other thing that I read in the month of January was Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin. Pretty well-known book. I'm assuming it's well-known. So in 1959, a white journalist takes a medication and goes under a UV light to darken his skin and passes as African American in the Deep South to experience and then write about what segregation is like. Now, I think that we can be very cynical about this and, of course, roll our eyes that a white man is trying to tell us what it's like to be black. And I think there's a little bit of justification in that in certain areas of this book, but undeniably, this was incredibly influential, and I can see why. It is very well written. It's a pleasure to read. I mean, the stuff that he talks about is fairly ugly, but he has a very nice writing style. And I think he gives us a very good window into quotidian life in segregated times, just with little things like how hard it is to find a public restroom to use, whereas whites had access to multiple restrooms on a street, and he would have to go like 13 blocks away and over a bridge in order to use a restroom, or how hard it is just to get a glass of water at times when you're thirsty and it's over 100 degrees out. I would actually still recommend this. It's certainly of its time, and there are things that we can criticize about it, but it is still very readable, very compelling, and a lot of fun, and also still informative. It's a great document of its time, I think. So, Black Like Me. And the last book I'm going to talk about is David Wengrow's The Origins of Monsters, Image and Cognition in the First Age of Mechanical Reproduction. Now, I have an interest in horror studies, so that's the monsters part, and I also do like ancient history, so I thought this would be a great marriage between the two. It definitely is much more about ancient history, and especially ancient archaeology. This is really written for an archaeological audience. He discusses theories and people that I am just not at all familiar with. I have a background in history. I have a master's in history. So some of the history stuff that he talked about, I definitely knew. But I know that there were some certain archaeological aspects that I'm sure went over my head and I didn't have the context for. But essentially, he's looking at the development of what he calls composite forms. That's what he's calling monsters. Figures that they're maybe made up of different animal parts, or they're humans with animal parts attached to them. Development of that within the rise of urban centers in mostly the Bronze Age. And we're talking like Mesopotamia and very early Egypt. And he kind of tries, he talks about following along trade routes and stuff like that. There's a lot of interesting things in here. It's really, the text itself is a little over 100 pages. And we've also got plenty of images throughout to go through. So this is not at all a long read. It went by very quick. But like I said, I'm sure that there were things about this that I missed overall. But I'm so glad that I read it. I would not recommend this to general readers at all. But if you're really interested in Bronze Age archaeology, not so much interested in monsters, you have to be interested in Bronze Age archaeology, then I would certainly recommend it. So that's my reading month. I'm going to try and grab these here. I read quite a bit. And here we go. So, again, I just talked about The Origins of Monsters. I read Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings by Annette Gordon-Reed. There's that erotica one if you really want to know what that's one about. You can look that up. A Gazelle Ate My Homework by Habib Fanny. The Voyage of the Slave Ship Hare by Kelley. You got Gothic Histories by Clive Bloom. And Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin. So, if you made it this far, as always, thank you, BookTube.